Then there's Americans who say this is a Chinese biological weapon gone wrong. You see, in my view, I had this op-ed piece published in the China Daily. I think this thing really becomes so politicized by Donald Trump and by his associates, primarily because between the two countries, there is very little political trust. That's the problem. The virus is not the problem. And so you see what is happening right now after the G20 virtual summit, like what the five of us are doing right now. President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump have agreed, at least temporarily, to put aside their political disagreements. Yes, there are some Chinese, like in any country, can find some, I would not, some zealous, some very radical nationalists say we're going to punish America by stopping providing medical supplies. Any country that is offended China, that does not represent the view of the Chinese government. And you see now the Chinese are sending over these medical supplies to many countries around the world. Let me conclude by saying I personally do not want to say that I am defending the Chinese government, but I think we are all scholars. We need to speak on the basis of facts. And besides, this is a whole thing about epistemology and all this technical stuff. I am not an expert. But let's wait until scientists, medical doctors, they have a final say about the origin of the virus, who transported outside from which country to where, and does it transfer from animal to humans or whatever happens. Before that, please, and I think the worst is for us to point fingers at each other, at Beijing or at Washington. And I'm very much encouraged by what happened during the G20 virtual summit. And that's why I was looking forward to this dialogue. When Mr. Murad contacted me, I think that this is a great forum for us to clarify some of these misunderstandings, misperceptions, or I would use the word distortions. And today we have social media. Everybody could come up with your own theory about what happened in Wuhan, what happened in New York, what happened in Washington, D.C., right? But we are all speculating. I think the best is for us to wait for the dust to settle before we pass any judgment about how the Beijing government has been doing. In my view, perhaps it did not so good, but after the quarantine of Wuhan, the Chinese government's measures have been extremely effective. And there are many valuable lessons that could be learned by governments around the world who are struggling to contain the spread of the virus within their own borders.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Tayo. So there are many questions. I think I would like to choose as to ask the question to our questions. So of course, first of all, people I think wants to know the future of globalization, the future of international organization, the future of United Nations and European Union. So I would like to ask the same question to all participants. What is your expectation about the future of international organization and the future of nation states? So, Professor Konstantinos, I would like to start with you first of all. What do you think about all the Andreas or Konstantinos, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, so
can you hear me now?
Please go ahead.
Okay, great.
Yes,
so
hear you. Could you please go ahead?
Okay, the issue with supranational organizations like the EU is that no matter how effective they can be, they cannot be very fast and work at the most effective pace as they are expected to do so, and therefore the people and the societies turn into the national governments, because the national governments have the means and they have the legitimacy and they can do it at a much faster pace than a supranational organization, so they turn into national governments to feel protected, to feel safe, to feel that there is a safety net for them. So I agree with the professor from China that until the dust has settled, we can only make some estimations as to what might happen, but we are not on the safe zone because there will be many more episodes in front of us. But for the time being, it is true, and I think that we can all agree that there is a turn to the national level, there is a turn to border control as a means to protect the spread of coronavirus. You can see that happening in Schengen area, which has happened in the past only once after the migration crisis and the refugee crisis of 2015. There were some measures taken within the Schengen area, but we all know that Schengen is one of the fundamental pillars of EU unity. And still, nowadays, there have been new restrictions in how people move within the Schengen area, simply because national governments need to protect the nationals. And I think that this will, for an amount of time that cannot be told, but I think that this will stay with us for some time. And the main challenge, or one of the main challenges for the globe, is to find ways to tackle this turn to the national state, because this turn to national state can very easily be translated to nationalism, to the feeling that we should be protected by the outsiders, that we should protect our supply chains, that we should become autonomous, and in order to be resilient in handling situations like the coronavirus, but not only epidemics or pandemics, but other crises in the future, we should try and become self-autonomous as more as possible. So here there is a thin line, and I don't want to take much of your time, but it is to me the biggest challenge for the international community to find within this thin line the perfect cocktail, in on the one hand creating the sense of security to societies, but on the other hand not going against globalization, which of course is nowadays weaker than it was a couple of months ago. We all realized the weak parts of globalization, but still our world is so much interconnected that we cannot defy this reality and ignore it.
Okay. So thank you. Andres, what do you think about the questions?
Thank you. International organizations are suffering right now, actually, from a renewed trust deficit from the failure to prepare for or stop COVID-19, especially due to the WHO's early amplification of China's claim that there was no person-to-person transmission, the overdue labeling of the disease as a pandemic, and the WHO leaders' flattery of China's failed performance to defeat the virus at the epidemic stage. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, who leads the WHO, is accused of having covered up cholera outbreaks in Ethiopia. You can find that in the New York Times, where he was health minister. Those cover-ups happened in 2006, 2009, and 2011, allegedly. Combined with Dr. Tedros' close relationship with China, the prestige of the WHO globally is falling fast. There's already increased public pressure to reform the United Nations and other international organizations to decrease Chinese influence. You don't hear that a lot among the elites, but there's a lot of opinion out there, public opinion out there, in support of changing the UN. For example, the U.S. State Department sent an envoy to the UN in January to counter the malign influence of the PRC and others in the UN system. President Trump had previously criticized the World Trade Organization, on which China depends for unimpeded global market access. There are also increased efforts China-backed candidates to all international organizations. For example, the defeat by a Singaporean on March 4th of China's candidate to lead the World Intellectual Property Organization. The U.S. and Japan supported the Singaporean candidate. China's approach of short-term benefit from the global spread of COVID-19 is therefore unlikely to overcome the deeper geopolitical competition between China and the U.S., or autocracy and democracy more generally. The opportunity to cooperate on COVID-19 could have provided a window of opportunity from which to escape the enduring superpower tensions between the US and China. But it did not. Instead, China denied responsibility and tried but failed to use the crisis for private benefit. It will be hard for China to shake off the resulting global opprobrium, but you won't find that opprobrium spoken very often in academic seminars. It's rare because China puts a lot of pressure on universities to keep this stuff out of the news. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andres. So, Professor Chaya, I would like to turn to you about the questions. You think that after the coronavirus outbreak, you see the more cooperation between United States and less competitions, or vice versa? Which one you think it's going to be possible in near future?
Well, I would hope that there will be more cooperation. Like Mr. Kors just said, this could be an opportunity for the two countries to mend their relations and to pick up where they left off and put aside their animosity, strategic, ideological resentment aside, at least for the moment. But my own sense is that that's probably more wishful thinking, because between the two capitals, there is already very much deep-rooted political distrust at the elite level, especially, but also at the popular level. So that's why you have so many of these outlandish conspiracy theories targeting each other. Besides, this is an election year in the United States, and there are many reasons, and very tempting, for the Trump team and for the Democratic team to take advantage of this issue and to make it a political weapon against whoever their political opponents are. But I do hope that the adults in Beijing and in Washington, they would learn a lesson, and they, at least for the common good of the human community, they would put aside their disputes and work together. Now, you asked the question about the international organizations. And so there's already been very much criticism of the WHO and some other international organizations. And I think these organizations, which were mostly founded after 1945, they do need to be updated. They do need to be reformed. But how do you carry out these reforms? Now, whose voices should be better represented? This is an issue for broad debate, especially among those experts and pundits who know how these international organizations work. In my view, it's best that we have try to get as many voices as possible within those IO. And especially, I give one example, the IMF, right? The U.S. Congress has been very strongly opposed to IMF reform. And that's why, frustrated and very upset, the Chinese government decided, at least a part of the reason, is to set up its own international organizations. And now some of my colleagues have been doing research. There's this trend of the southern migration of international organizations. Those organizations that used to be headquartered in the north, and now they are moving down to the southern hemisphere. And that could be a trend in the future, unless the US-led international system adopt timely and very good reforms to reflect the broad interest of the international community.
Okay. Thank you. What do you think about all these, about the future of international politics? Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Okay, I want to be optimistic though. Still, there are some aspects that leads us to, pessimism. I want to touch the first question you have directed to Professor Konstantinos, the effect of this crisis or such crisis to international organizations, states, or supranational organizations like EU. For me, the one who budgets and have resources and control resources, including allocating them, do have the power. And currently, state actors do budget themselves and allot the resources. That's a reality. For the supranational organization, EU, the situation is a bit different, because all member countries handed over their sovereignty in terms of economy, monetary issues, to EU. That means EU was expected to react in a more appropriate manner by providing aid to the member states in case they need it. So for sure, there will be a kind of self-criticism in EU as the sole supranational organization. We should expect this. For the states, I think depending on their nature in terms of democratic one or authoritarian or totalitarian one, it will differ, I believe. Okay, the ones who are democratic will be questioned during the elections. That's the natural course of democracy. But the ones who are authoritarian, well, then the consciousness level of the society, at the public, at the very low, strata, it will be a defining feature. The ones who cannot provide service and welfare to the public, then this type of regimes may be shaken in the future. Because what we have witnessed in Arab Spring was almost a similar case. So after this corona break, we may face another disaster. So eligibility of the states who are not democratic will be at the edge of the creek. Another one is the efficiency of international organizations. Okay, the UN suffered a lot during this crisis. But if the UN is dependent on the resources of the, major powers in the globe, that means UN will always lack. Then there must be a kind of reform, either in a political design or economic resources. And international organizations, augmented by the state's capacity, must be in charge of such epidemic diseases or natural disasters. Otherwise, we can't respond to them. That means states might, hand over some of their authorities in case such huge global disasters. Otherwise, we can't respond to them. And for civilian society organizations, pending to consciousness, I said, well, they will, increase their sound, force the governments, but on the other hand, as James Rosenow continuously underlined it, they will be more prominent and more active to force the governments. We have to expect it, and it must be such like that. okay, as I said in my presentation, there will be a change pending to the consciousness of the publics, and we have to be aware of the change in the coming period as we face the other ones. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Murat. So I would like to thank you also for all participants for their valuable, contribution to this debate. So I would like to also the audience for their joining us today. So I think all the debates will continue, and we are going to continue to talk about the impact of coronavirus on international politics. And thank you so much for joining us today, and hope to see you the next panel about different topics. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Yeah.
Thank you.
Goodbye.